Hi everyone. It is Sunday at 3 o'clock, so you know what time that is. It is time to talk about positive parenting. Hi. Oh, hi everyone. It's Monica Mora here, Dr. Monica Mora, and it is 3 o'clock on Sunday, so that means it is time to talk about positive parenting. So thanks so much for being here with me if you're able to join. And for those of you that come across this after 3 p.m. on Sunday, you know that you can find this in the units, in the units section there. You should be able to find it. Now, I apologize. I have some flicking going on my end, on my screen, so I apologize if that's coming through on your side. I guess we'll just have to play it out, see how it goes. So anyway, thanks again for being here with me. Today we're going to follow kind of the same format we've been using. We're going to talk a little bit about parent wins. So if those of you that are watching me right now could just pop in a comment about where you're watching from and just reflect a little bit on a success you may have experienced over the week, that would be great. And again, remember to recognize and to reward yourself. And hi, Molly. Just remember to always reflect back on things that went well for you in your parenting journey over the course of the week. And that just helps us kind of regroup at the end of every week and refocus and kind of approach the coming week just with a better mindset, a more positive mindset there. I do want to let you know that we have the admin team here at the Too Cool for School Virtual Kids Campsite. We've discussed timing of this video, and we know that weekends are weekends, and that it's probably easier to be able to catch these live videos during the week. And so we've decided to change this particular topic time, the positive parenting time, to Mondays. So I will no longer be with you live Sunday at 3, but I will be with you live Mondays at 4 p.m. Mondays at 4 p.m. And we will start that on Monday, May 4th. That'll be our first 4 p.m. slot. So we'll see you then. Okay, and we'll remind you, don't worry, we'll remind you and send announcements out so you don't miss it. All right, so looks like we've got some folks watching. So I know Molly said hi. Anybody else care to say hi and share where you're watching from? And again, thinking about parent wins, so thinking about or successes or just things you want to give yourself kudos for. We are going to be talking about tantrums today. We're going to start talking about tantrums today. Tantrums is a big subject. It is under the heading of our umbrella of helping kids learn self-regulation, emotional self-regulation. And so we will, is there a problem? Can someone just put in the comments there if I'm glitching out or if there's an issue? No? Maybe Molly, do you think if you're watching, can you let me know? Feels like I'm glitching. I keep flicking here and it's distracting me. Hi, Litzy from Chicago. Awesome. Thank you for joining. Hi, Caitlin. Also from Washington. Good. Thanks for joining us. Okay, so am I okay? I'm not glitching out on your side? All right. Well, we'll just, like I said, we'll wing it. So we are going to begin the topic of tantrums, or we've been actually talking about all these videos that we've been doing and all the strategies we've been talking about are all actually going to help you with tantruming behavior or just escalated behavior or intensive behavior that you might struggle, as we all do, to deal with. And so I don't want you to think that there's just one magic strategy that's going to work for handling our children's escalated or intense behavior. It's actually a whole package of things that you do before that behavior even starts, before the behavior shows up, that's going to make the difference. So like I said, it's all a package. And you also might think, well, why does she keep talking about things that I'm doing or having me reflect on my behavior? And the reason is because it doesn't matter how many parenting books you read or how many strategies that you might try, nothing will work in terms of getting your children's behaviors under control or, bringing them to a place that you're happy with until you really become aware of what you're doing as a parent and how you're responding to their behavior. And honestly, once you kind of, you don't have to change everything you're doing as a parent, but it's kind of fine tuning. As long as you kind of polish it up a little bit, fine tune it, tweak it a little bit, pull in some of the things that maybe you're kind of more extreme on, that kind of thing. And so that's why we're having, every week we have these discussions, and we're just building up on that. We're just, what we call that is just building up our own parent self-awareness. Okay. So before we jump into the topic of tantrums, I just want to review some of what we discussed last week. And the first thing was this idea of shifting from looking at misbehavior as being bad, right? We tend to label behavior as good behavior or bad behavior. And really, I threw out the idea of really shifting from that. And so looking at, instead of labeling it as good or bad, just looking at it as a tool that your child is using to communicate something to you, okay? And really all children use behavior as a way of communication, but especially our youngest ones, right? Because they haven't developed language, they haven't developed words, their brains haven't developed the capacity to have logic and to think about their behavior in certain ways. And so again, that behavior is a key way to communicate to parents what they're feeling, what they're thinking, what they're needing, all of that kind of stuff. So that's what we spoke about. That's one of the things we spoke about, is just looking at behavior, all behavior as a form of communication. And so that way it just helps us be a little bit more calmer in our approach. So instead of looking at it as, oh, they're being so bad right now, just taking a moment to reflect, okay, so what's that about? Like, what's going on here? Let me see if I can figure out where that might be coming from. And then that can just help us be a little bit more calmer in our approach, for sure, but more effective, and handle that behavior in an effective way. The next thing we spoke about was this idea of when we see that misbehavior, behavior that we don't like, behavior that sort of triggers us. Most of us, depending on how we were raised, and most of us were raised with parents who sort of, from their parents and from their upbringing, dealt with things with a heavy hand, right? And so many of us have learned to look at this misbehavior or this negative behavior, bad behavior, whatever you want to say, as needing punishment, right? So we come in wanting to punish that behavior. We come in with that heavy hand, right? And what we know is that doesn't work. Okay, it doesn't work. What it tends to do is it tends to escalate the behavior or the situation. It tends to intensify everything. And then, a sort of unintended negative consequence for us is that we end up teaching our children a way to respond to things that they don't like in a way that we actually don't want them to learn. So what I mean by that is, if they are arguing, let's say they're arguing, and you come in and you're yelling and screaming at them to stop, right? Or to knock it off. What they have learned from you coming in that way is that when they don't like something, they can come in, yell and scream, and think that they're going to get their way, right? And so that's another thing that we discussed, is really looking at just... looking at a way of, instead of coming in with punishment, coming in as, okay, first of all, there is going to be consequences, and consequences are different than punishment. Okay, so there's a little bit of a difference that we spoke about last week. But then again, coming in and just thinking about, what is it that I want them to learn? How is it that I want them to behave? And then coming in that calmer way. And then that is going to require you to kind of come up with some calming strategies and some ways to kind of keep your cool as you're dealing with that misbehavior. Not easy at all. I know, but it is necessary, okay? So then the last thing that I just want to review with you before we jump in is the idea of, I laid out a couple questions for you to reflect on as we move forward to this. So we spoke a little bit about the difference between punishment versus discipline, and really we want to move away from punishment, move away from the punitive ways of parenting, and move into more of a discipline strategy. So discipline is about teaching, and we want to teach our children the behavior that we want, right? And not unintentionally reinforce the behaviors we don't want, right? And so reflection, what I asked you to think about is just first of all, think about what is the current discipline strategy you're using, and do you find it to be effective, meaning that you don't have to keep doing it over and over and over again for the same behavior, okay? That's what we mean by effective. And then also, what's your backup if that doesn't work? And finally, going back to that teaching point, what is that form of discipline that you're using ultimately teaching your child, and is it what you want them to learn? Okay, so I did ask you to maybe to reflect on that a little bit there. So that is it for the review. Hopefully you were able to reflect on that a little bit and maybe understand yourself a little bit more. And so now what we'll move into is this big topic of tantruming, okay? Tantruming behavior. And again, I really encourage you to think about this tantruming behavior. The tantrums are a way of your child expressing something to you, communicating something to you, okay? Now, first thing for you to remember always is that tantrums are normal. They are natural. Honestly, all children at some point will tantrum, okay? There isn't one child in this world who's ever not, well, I'm getting all flustered, but tantruming is normal. Bottom line, tantruming is normal. All children are going to tantrum. Your child is going to tantrum at some point, okay? And that's okay. You don't have to panic. The best behaved child in the world at some point is going to tantrum. And so don't panic when your child has a tantrum, okay? Because that, again, gets us all flustered. It gets us exasperated. It gets our mind in a different space, and that pulls us away from, again, responding in a calm way. So the hardest part of parenting, honestly, is keeping our own emotions in check. And especially when we're dealing with this misbehavior, this tantruming behavior. It tends to push buttons in us. It tends to, we take it personal. And so we tend to think it's a reflection on us as parents. If we stay in that way of thinking when our children have a tantrum, again, that makes our emotions start to escalate, and we become dysregulated, and we become agitated, frustrated, angry, embarrassed, and then we end up reacting instead of responding. So the hardest part, as I said, really the hardest part of being a parent is keeping your own emotions in check, managing your own emotions. And so, like I said, thinking about those calming strategies that you can always use, that you know you can use in a pinch when you're out grocery shopping and your toddler pitches a fit, or your 5-year-old pitches a fit. Really thinking about what can I use in that moment to bring my emotions down, keep them under control, and be able to deal with this tantrum in an effective way. Now, when I say that some of, tantruming is normal, right? We talked about tantruming being normal. And the need for us to sort of remain calm and empathetic to our children and try to understand where that behavior is coming from so that we can respond with discipline versus punishment, right? We do have to know that, especially our little ones, they haven't developed, a lot of them haven't developed language to be able to communicate to us what is going on, what they need, what they want, what they feel. But also their brains haven't developed that capacity for logical, rational thought, right? So for us as parents, we tend to be, why are they behaving like that? It's irrational, right? It doesn't make sense. But our brains are obviously developed beyond what theirs are, right? And so we have the capacity to see the situation that way. They don't. And so if you're interested in understanding a little bit more in terms of the brain development, about where children are, and for some helpful tips about what to do and how to respond, I highly recommend the book called The Whole Brain Child by Dr. Dan Siegel and Tina Payne Bryson. The Whole Brain Child. That's a really helpful book, again, to sort of understand just your child's developing brain, but in particular around this tantruming behavior, like what to do with that tantruming behavior there. Okay, so the other thing that we're talking about in terms of the hardest part of parenting and how to deal with it is, and trust me, I know it is really difficult to stay calm in the face of that tantruming behavior. It's hard not to have those feelings of irritation and frustration and anger, that kind of stuff. But what's really important is to try to, first of all, just recognize it, right? Recognize that you're feeling that way. So whatever your cues might be, if it's tension in your shoulders, if you're clenching your jaws, whatever it might be, first of all, notice that you are in that space of anger and frustration. Use your calming strategies to sort of bring yourself down a little bit in terms of your elevated emotional state. And then really try to replace that anger and frustration with compassion for your child, right? Compassion for your child, and try to understand where they're coming from. Understand why they might be feeling that way. What kind of experience are they going through right now? And think about that for a moment. These are our children. And so why do we respond with their irritation and frustration from a more elevated, agitated state than we would, let's say, with a friend or a colleague, right? If you're dealing with a friend or a colleague who's highly elevated, we don't match it, or we tend not to match it, right? We tend to keep ourselves under control, keep ourselves in a calm space, and try to use our empathy and our compassion to try to understand what's going on for this person, right? To be able to help. And that's the same thing that we really need to try to do with our children, right? And that way, again, it helps us just respond in a more effective way. And so thinking about that, it helps us just reflect on, what is it that they might be needing right now. Okay. Now, I'm not minimizing the behavior. Okay, that is behavior that we don't want, and we do want to be able to teach them that there is a consequence. But we will implement consequences and not come at them in a punitive way. And we, like I said, this is a huge topic, and so this is going to be kind of a few weeks of us talking about this concept of tantruming, or this behavior of tantruming, and what to do about it. Let's see. And the other thing is too that one of the trickiest parts, and I'm going to say this over and over again because it is so important, is handling our own behavior and our own anger. So we're not handling our kids necessarily. We need to handle our behaviors and then respond to our children. Okay. At the same time that we're having compassion for our children, though, I want to just remind you to have compassion for yourself. Okay. And here's the thing. Saying to ourselves over and over again, they're not doing this to me. They are not, this behavior isn't, he's not giving me a bad time, right? He's not, basically the bottom line is it's really important not to take this tantruming behavior personal. It's not a personal thing they're doing to you. If we look at it that way, and it, like I said, it's not easy to do. It can be really difficult to do. If you're out shopping in public and your child is having a tantrum, or you're home, all these days you're home, and it's a stressful situation for everybody, and your child is tantruming or escalating or acting out all the time, you may feel like, again, it's personal. Don't they know what I'm doing? Don't they know how stressful life is right now? Why do they keep doing this to me? If we keep in that space, it's incredibly difficult to solve anything, right? To solve anything that might be going on and to respond to the situation. So really remembering that your child is not doing this to you, okay? It's not personal. I have so many notes on this, so I'm just trying to look back on what I've written down here. Okay, and again, remember the point about keeping ourselves in a calm space is that so that we don't accidentally say something or do something in a response to that tantrum behavior that we're going to regret later, right? We may yell, we may scream, we may threaten, we may, make our child feel guilty, and all of that. Again, we don't want to do that. It'll have repercussions later on, and we don't want to, or even make the situation worse. So we really don't want to do that. So some of the things that we have here, and again, remember, there isn't going to be just one magic strategy that's going to deal with that's going to prevent tantrums from happening. And I encourage you to go back to some of those videos and look at the things such as your clear, calm instructions, talking about ground rules, focusing on the positive, commenting on those good behaviors that you see, spending lots of quality time with your children, and remember, in shorter increments. All of those things are prevention strategies. They really help with some of that behavior that might be triggering the tantrums. So I really encourage you to think about it that way, and spend some time looking over those strategies, because everything you do helps minimize the chance that those tantrums will occur. Okay, so one thing that's really important too is for you and your mindset in terms of being prepared to deal with tantrums is to think about a plan. What kind of plan can you come up with ahead of time, knowing that tantrums are going to happen? So what's your plan for keeping yourself calm? What's your plan for approaching your child? What if you have multiple children in the home and one is tantruming and the other ones are, kind of coming around? What's your plan for being able to deal with those other children and have them do something while you deal with the tantrum? What's your plan for having some support or some backup? Is there a space in your house that you're going to be able to go with this child so that maybe you can reduce the amount of stimulation that's going on in the home? So just thinking about some things, and like I said, as we continue the conversation about tantruming, we will be talking specifically about some kind of more nuts and bolts kinds of things that you can do to deal with tantrums. But these are just some overarching things to be thinking about. And again, the more that we can plan ahead and have some of these things ready, what I'll do if this happens, the easier it will be for you to respond to from that calm space, right? And not elevate the situation. So that's really helpful. And again, remember, the more that you can stay in that calm space and respond from that place, that's what you're teaching your child to do, right? In a situation where they may be frustrated and dealing with something like that as well. Now, the other thing that's really important to do for all of us is to this goes back to what I was speaking about in terms of behavior as a form of communication, is to try to understand where this behavior may be coming from. So for those of you that are dealing with a child who's tantruming quite frequently, and remember, I'm talking about these are in normal situations, in our typical situations, dealing with tantruming behavior. These are a little bit different circumstances that we're in right now. So you can expect a lot more emotional behavior to come up and a lot more reactivity to things that maybe your children weren't reactive to before, because tantruming can be a release, an emotional release for children. So just keep that in mind. But I think the first thing that's super helpful and super important to do is to try to understand what's going on with these tantruming behaviors. So for the next week, I would really encourage you to start paying attention to those tantrums. Start maybe by keeping track of how often are these tantrums happening. Like just a simple, really simple tally on a piece of paper. You can just write Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, all the way down, and just every day just make a tick mark of how many tantrums happen. So you can see, are there particular days that this child tends to tantrum more? And then you can also maybe reflect on what was going on for me on those days. Did I have a lot going on that day, and so maybe I was a little bit more impatient with my child, or maybe I didn't have a lot of time to respond to my child when they needed me. So it just helps us kind of understand, are there certain times that this behaviors tend to happen, and then try to understand what was going on those days. So that's one way to sort of start paying attention to that tantruming behavior. The other thing is also paying attention to, if you kind of know already, that your child tends to tantrum quite a bit, or on certain days rather than others, start paying attention to potential we call them triggers. So things that are setting your child off, right? And so when your child is having a tantrum, maybe just do once the situation is complete, figure out a little bit, like, what was it that set my child off? Like, was it that I said no? Was it that he couldn't continue on the computer? Was it because he wanted my attention while I was making dinner? So you're trying to understand, again, what set this child off to have this to have this tantrum. So trying to understand those triggers, where the behavior is coming from. And the flip side too is at the end, understanding, how did that tantrum end? Who ended it? Did he end it? Did she end it? Did I end it? Like, how did it end? Who ended it? Did it end because I threatened? Did it end because I yelled and we both separated and he ended up just crying in his room? Did it end because I gave in and I let him have more TV time? So understanding what seems to set them off, what were those triggers, and the flip side of that, how does it end? Because we really want to pay attention to what we're doing again. Is it accidentally reinforcing our child utilizing a tantrum as a form of communication, right? Instead of teaching this child a way to talk to us about what it is that they want, what it is that they're feeling, and express it and communicate it to us in a more healthy and appropriate way, okay? So thinking about those kinds of things. Now, when I talk to you a little bit about, this is what I mean about just a quick little, just get a piece of paper and just write down, on Monday, Tuesday, just like that, and just do a quick tally throughout the week. And then at the end, you can just make a quick total. And this just helps us understand throughout the week what might be going on. And remember, like I said, this, don't be alarmed if you see a lot of tantrums happening throughout the week. Right now, our children, like I said, there's a lot going on for them. A lot in their life has changed. Everybody's under one roof for a long period of time. So you may see a lot of tantrums on that. But again, this is just all useful information for you in terms of how to move forward. Okay? Now, some other strategies that we're going to be talking about next week are, we're going to be talking about how to notice some minor the beginnings of tantrums. If your child has learned to use tantrums as a way to get what they want, in terms of they know that if they can tantrum really long and really loud, that you'll eventually give into it. We're going to talk about ways to not do that. So ways to maybe begin not paying attention or ignoring some of that beginning escalation behavior. We'll be talking about ways to use something that we call quiet time, which is a way to sort of just remove our child to the edge of the room or the activity. We're not going to isolate them. We're not going to take them anywhere else. We're just going to, it's sort of a signal to the child and to the child's brain that we need to take a little bit of a break, or we need to take a calming down time. We're going to talk about ways to talk to your child about ways to calm down when there is not a tantrum. So some of that, again, like I said, preventative work. So taking a moment when behavior is not escalated and start talking to your child about feeling frustrated and feeling angry, and what are some tools they can use when they get in that space, when it's really frustrating and really makes you mad when you don't get what you want, right? I know. And when mommy feels that way, sometimes this is what I do to help myself. So just start having those conversations and helping your child get some tools, so that when you say maybe we need it's time for calming down time, that they know what they can do to help themselves calm down. So we've got a lot of different strategies to talk about. We are going to talk about taking a break / calming down / timeout, whatever you want to call it. We will be talking about how to use that and how we're using it in a non-punitive way. So it's not a way of punishing them for having a tantrum. It's a way to help them learn how to take all that escalated emotion and regroup, right? Take a moment and learn to calm themselves down to a point then where they can come back and rejoin the family or the situation there. So like I said, it's a big topic. And the first things to do are to start paying attention to how you respond to those tantrums and where you're coming from there, and to begin to track those tantrums. How often are they happening? What seems to set them off? and how do they end, right? And am I accidentally reinforcing them by what I'm doing? So I just encourage you to start paying attention to that this week. I also encourage you to continue to use all those other strategies that we've been talking about as a way to prevent these things from happening. And I'm going to highlight again that quality time. Go back and listen to that quality time, and remember that it doesn't have to be long, huge chunks of time. It can be short bits of time that just get those needs met for your child. And I also want to highlight focusing on the positive, right? The more that you can highlight those behaviors that you want. For a child that tends to tantrum when they get their way, if they're ever asking you for something in a nice, calm way, or if you notice that they were starting to get irritated and then they switched and calmed themselves down, jump all over that. Comment on that. Say things to them like, wow, I really noticed how you were upset about that, but you calmed yourself down. I saw you take some deep breaths. That was really good. Or I really like the way that you asked me in such a calm way that you wanted more TV time, right? That helps me hear you better. Those kinds of things. So really begin to focus on those little things as, again, prevention for those escalated times, those tantruming times. So again, a lot of information. I always feel like when we start that maybe I'm not going to have enough to say, and then 30 minutes goes by and I realize that I didn't get to half the things I wanted to say. But I hope this information just helps you begin looking at tantrums in a different way, focusing on, again, you not taking those tantrums as a personal affront to you, or that it's maybe more of a reflection of you failing as a parent. Okay, that's not it. And then we will continue the discussion and continue talking about different strategies and ways to be able to get those tantruming behaviors under control and help our children learn more effective ways of communicating to us rather than escalated behavior. So I hope this was helpful, and just a reminder, you can go to my website, www.drmonikamora.com. I've got some options there for you for more support if you need it. And then reminder that we've also got our new time, Mondays, May 4th, 4 p.m. We're going to start 4 p.m. on Mondays, and that will begin on May 4th. All right, so have a great week. Bye.